Great, so good afternoon. Today we are going to continue with the Metronome project. The purpose of this project is so that you get an understanding of the project mark scheme. So if we start on here, last lesson we quickly went through a waterfall style study. We wrote out the analysis section where you said what we're trying to solve and we want to make a metronome app. How do we know that that problem is finite and solvable? Who are our stakeholders? How are they going to use it? Your homework at the moment is a little bit of research, and from that research we're writing down what you want your project to do, what you don't need your project to do, what hardware and software requirements we have to live with, and what success looks like. So that's most of the analysis section. I've only gone through the 9 to 10 mark section. I've ignored everything else because they're just a less good version of the same column. You only need the best column on here. So we've done most of design. We did some decomposition, breaking down our project into smaller sections. We did a top-down decomposition diagram. We said that there's not that much really in terms of algorithms. We've just got to go from the BPM that the user types in, a number, beats per minute, into the interval in milliseconds. The last thing we got to at the end of last lesson was usability features. So you drew a sketch of what it's going to look like. I said I'm going to go for a high contrast mode. We haven't yet thought about classes and data structures, but what we are going to do before we move on to is these 2 bullet points. So the test data. I know that you probably wouldn't think about testing until you've written some code. But remember, we're modeling the waterfall software development lifecycle, where you have to do all of your analysis before you do any of your design. You have to do all of your design before you do any of your implementation. You have to do all of your implementation before you do any of your testing. You have to do all of your testing before you do any of your evaluation, etc. It's not very realistic, but it helps us understand what all the processes are. So create some test tables for me, please. I can't remember how many columns we need. But for this, let's have a test number so that you can say to your manager, who loves and is obsessed by the waterfall model because they're a control freak and they like to know exactly where we're up to, that you have completed test 1 or test 2 or test 3 or test 1A or test 1B, etc. In the real world, you would automate these tests and write code before you write your actual project to test that your actual code works. In your project, it's unlikely that many of you will do automatic testing. You'll test it manually. We need a description to say what we're testing. We'll probably want to match it with your success criteria from the bottom of your thingamabobs. What's that? No, the analysis section. So I'm going to go view and split so I can see those success criteria. And there we go, success criteria. Test data. This is what the user is going to type in or what you're going to provide to test a particular program or sub-program. And what you want to happen if things go well. Some of you will have memories of GCSE testing or other projects here. So in your actual project, you'll break this down into iterations and prototypes. We're not going to do that for now because this is going to be a waterfall model where we do all of your testing, all of your development all in one go, and then all of your testing in one go. But we kind of work out what we want to check. So let's see, basic web page. Success criteria, you need to be specific. It needs to be measurable. So a web page is far too vague. What do we want? With a title and text box to enter the BPM score. We're not actually typing anything at the moment. We just want to go to the web page. What do we want to see? want to see text box, user input field that allows you to type in a number. That's it. So you're planning out what you're going to code by thinking, how can you test it? Then, oh, hang on, success criteria. I wrote the wrong thing in here, didn't I? What do I want to see? That's what I want to see. Sorry. Success criteria 1. It's linked to this. User can set the BPM, so that's success criteria 2. Description, BPM. Test data, let's try it with a sensible value. So it's not actually running the metronome yet. It's not going to beep at us. It's just testing for sensible values. Valid data is accepted. We're still testing the BPM, still success criteria 2. The test data this time is going to be nothing. Are we going to have any instant validation? It's not going to throw an error message. That'll be really irritating if you're a musician. I would like the BPM to be set to 60 or 50. I'm going to say that's the minimum. I think we specified a minimum in the analysis. I don't know. Yeah, there we go. We even set it in the success criteria, 50 BPM. So let's do a maximum now. 1D, set in the BPM, can't even type. Still success criteria 2. Let's try a number too small. And you get the idea. Straight away, you're thinking of your edge cases, your minimum values, your maximum values, values bigger than the maximum, values bigger than the smaller. I like that. I've invented a new word. Let's go 30. So I'm assuming if they type anything invalid, that we're going for the easiest option to play along to. So that's the smallest. Oh, no, that's more like success criteria 3, isn't it? The invalid ones. There we go. Next, I'd like some buttons. So do I put that as part of my test up here or an extra test? Well, if I was doing it iteratively, I'd probably have them as separate tests and I'd do them for different prototypes. My initial prototype would just have a really simple start-stop button and my next prototype would have increase and decrease. But I'm not doing an iterative approach. I'm doing waterfall where everything happens all at once. So I want some buttons. All at once. Right, here we go. I'm gonna, again, this is not an iterative approach. We're going to do everything all at once. If it was iterative, I might name my tests like prototype 1 and prototype 2. But to avoid any confusion and to say that we're just going to do it all in one, I'm going to rename all of these. Just to say all of my documentation, no, all of my testing is going to happen in one go because it's waterfall, it's not sensible, it's just easy to manage. Just got lots of different numbers for tests. Right. Test 7 then for success criteria 4. And this is increasing. BPM. BPM set to something sensible, 60. Press increase. What do I want to happen? It should increase up to 65. Notice I'm being explicit. I'm not saying user presses the increase button. When do they press it? How many times do they press it? I'm now at the maximum that I've said I want to be able to support. I'm going to press the increase button. What do I want to happen? BPM should stay at 120. Well, what happens now if we increase the BPM and it's currently set to 119? If we're increasing by 5, we shouldn't go up to 124. But do we stop at 119 or do we go up to the maximum? Well, I think it'd be sensible to go to the maximum. You decide. The point is, you're thinking before you write any code, what do you want your program to do? How do you want it to behave? So that you can do all the validation. And then, to be honest, we've got decrease and we've got everything else, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to give you 3 or 4 minutes to try and put as many tests in as you can that match all of your success criteria. So I've written in some extra tests here for testing the decrease beats per minute button, and I'm starting to think about testing the actual start button. So if the BPM has been set to 60 beats per minute, not currently playing, user presses start. You've got to be really explicit for what your test data is. Don't be general, be specific. What do I want to happen? I would like to hear a tick every second and the start button changes to stop. Yeah, so this success criteria is only for the start and stop button. So all I'm testing really at the moment is the start button changes to stop. Well done, thank you. Yeah, BPM set to 60 and metronome currently playing. User presses stop. Stop button changes back to start. Great, we're getting there. When the metronome starts, there should be an audible beep. This is success criteria 7. I might want to test this with lots of different BPMs. Who can't spell audible? I was having an interesting conversation with someone who's actually written a project like this, and we're going to do it fairly badly in that we'll implement it so that it just about works. But I suspect that our visual indication might well go out of sync with our audible beep because of the way that web pages do timing. Our graphics card will probably handle our animation, and our CPU will probably handle the timing for the audible beep, and they may well go out of sync. So we might have a case where the visible is going to be out of sync with the audible thing, which is not what you want as a musician. So if I was going to do this properly, I might put an extra test in here to leave it running for 5 minutes and check that it stays in sync for that whole period. I'm not going to bother because it's only a short project. It's a proof of concept. But you've got to think about these things in advance. Clicks. Again, if I was doing this properly, I'd probably want to try this whilst it's playing. And I want to try it whilst it's not playing, under every circumstance. There we go. That will do. So remember, whenever you make some changes, when you do something, when you get to the end of a lesson or you finish a section, you want to save it. You want to commit it. What have we just done? Test tables. And then we want to push it so that it is on GitHub. So whilst you're finishing off, let's have a look at the mark scheme. Just on this bullet point, identified and justified the test data to be used during iterative development of the solution. Haven't yet done key variables and data structures or classes. And we haven't talked about validation. So let's have a look, shall we? Should probably do that. Should we do it before our testing or after our testing? Doesn't really matter. Let's think. If it was me, I'd do it as a table with 3 columns. You could do it as paragraphs if you like. There's no right or wrong way to lay it out. I don't want everyone in their final project to have exactly the same layout. You think about how you're going to do it. But if it was me, I'd think about the key variables, the data types, and the validation. Does it say that we've got to justify it? Yeah, probably. Variable, data type, validation, justification. Columns to the right. So let's think. What we're going to store? We're going to have a variable probably called BPM. What is it? It's going to be an integer. We want to do some range check between, what do we say, 50 and 120. Probably going to have some other range checks here. Are we going to have a variable, just a variable for the integer, or are we going to get the value from a user? BPM user input, maybe? That's going to be a string. We'll try and convert that string into an integer if it's valid. We should probably do a type check and a presence check. Oh, so between 1 and 2 beats per minute. That's not quite true, is it? Just less than. So we want to convert this to an interval in milliseconds. So let's call it interval ms. It's going to be an integer. Validation, well, if we correctly validate this, then we're not going to have to validate this because we'll just use it to store the results, I think. Yeah, we've just had a suggestion for would we have to validate it to make sure it's not a decimal. It'd probably still work if it was a decimal, but yeah, we will round it. Make sure it's rounded to 0 decimal places. Doesn't actually need it as a whole number, but we'll work with an interval. Is there anything else? I guess we should toggle the UI mode. So we could have high contrast mode, which could be a Boolean validation is a box is going to be ticked or a box is not going to be ticked. You can decide in your user interface whether you're going to have a checkbox that you tick to enable it or you have a button to toggle it. I'm probably going to go for a checkbox. To be honest, for this project, that's about it. It's not complex enough for your actual project. For your actual project, you probably want to add in some kind of, I don't know, database storage or additional calculation, something like that. Yeah, well done. So we're also going to need something like is playing or currently playing. Okay, so we've explored what variables we're going to store in your actual project. You might want to, and I'd recommend that you do your projects using object-oriented paradigm, which means you might want to do a class diagram, or at least describe the entity relationship diagrams where you've got, you know, your methods, your attributes, showing whether things are public or private, and the inheritance, showing the subclasses and the superclasses. But I think that's overkill for a very simple project like what we've got today. Let's go back to the mark scheme then. The only one we've not really done yet then is the further data used in post-development. So that's going to be just before we do the evaluation. After, post means after we've written our code, what are we then going to test? So that's going to be basically a survey where you put it in front of you put your final solution in front of your stakeholder and you say, what do you make of it? So it sounds weird, doesn't it, to do post-development testing before we've done development. But let's just skip ahead. We are going to think about development. We'll come back to that. We are going to test to inform development. But then we are going to evaluate. And when we evaluate, we're going to do post-development testing for function, for robustness, and for usability. So if we're thinking about how to test it, we need to make sure it does what it's supposed to do, that's function, that it doesn't crash, and that it's easy to use. So we're going to ask some questions to our stakeholders. Say, please can you use my program and record any bugs or any times that it crashed? Or can you tell me how easy to use it was between 1 and 10 and how could it be easier to use? Can you tell me, did it work exactly as you wanted it to? So I'm not going to write this out. You can make it as like a Google Forms thing, or you just record a load of questions. And I'm going to deliberately split it up into functionality, usability, and robustness. Why? Because that's what you're going to be marked on. I'm not going to leave space for all of it, but these are the questions that I'd kind of put together. What did you want the program to do? What did you click on exactly? In what order? That's functionality. Robustness. Did the program crash? If so, when? You might deliberately tell them to enter unexpected values and ask them to record what happened. And then usability. How easy to use was the high contrast mode? How easy to use was the option to change the beats per minute, to start and stop? How could it be easier to use? What was confusing? Is there anything that could be done to make the program less confusing and more user-friendly? Would it have benefited from some instructions? Would it have benefited from some hints? Anything like that? All right, so we're about to start the fun bit, the implementation. So before we do any implementation, I hate it when I do that. We're about to start something fun and then before we do it, sorry. We will copy and paste our testing table, but we'll add some extra bits onto it because I said if you spend the time doing your planning for testing well, then you've got a to-do list. So insert columns to the right, actual result. Now I've got a to-do list. The first thing I'm going to do is this. And when I'm committing, I might even put like done test 1 in my commit log so that you can keep track of what's happened. All right, let's get coding then, shall we? Solution Explorer. I've actually got some stuff in here that I want to get rid of because I've got something that kind of works. Let's start from a blank page. Okay, there are different versions of HTML. We want to use HTML5. I'm sure I've said this before. You may well have this part already. We need a HTML tag. Inside HTML, we need a body tag and a head tag. We should have a title, maybe. The title is what you see at the top of the page, and that can be Metronome. I'm pretty sure we did this in a previous lesson. Right, what do I want to happen? I want a web page with a text box to enter the BPM score. If it's on my test table, that's what I'm going to try and do. So let's save it. Let's open this folder. Right click on the project and find that file. And I can't see anything there yet because, well, there's nothing in the body. The title is there in the tab. My test says I want a button. So if you want to know how to do stuff in HTML, just Google it. Let's go HTML text input box, and it'll probably take you to W3 Schools, and it'll give you loads of stuff. I don't want it in a form. I do just want an input box. So let's have an input. Just that for now. Refresh this page, and I've got an input. It doesn't look very pretty, but I can type in some numbers. Shall I have a default value? Yes, please. Value equals 60. Control S, Control R. Right, it's looking good. Nearly passed my first test. Oh, and 2 buttons to increase and decrease the BPM score. This time I need a type equals button. I've got a button, but there's no text in it. Is it the value or is it the text? I don't know. Let's just have value equals. There we go. Pop that over there. Don't need to show this at the moment. How can I undock it? That's better. An input tag doesn't need to be closed. Notice the body tag needs to be opened and closed. You don't need to close an input tag, as in you can't, you shouldn't do that. So HTML is the language that you use for the structure and the content of your page. That's it, pretty much. Is it? Or does it need a start button? It doesn't say we need a start button. Maybe we should have one. I'm going to put one on. Probably should add it to the test. Bless you. There we go. It's not very pretty. It doesn't do anything. But we've passed the test. I don't like it. I'd like the start button to be underneath. Can't remember what I said my user interface was going to look like. Let's have a look. Something like that. So I'm going to put my start button inside a page division, a div tag, which just blocks it and puts it on another line, like that. Page division. Next thing, if I want to be able to get the value of this thing, I need to give it a name. If I want to detect that somebody's pressed this, I need to give it a name. So let's be specific about what this is. This is a tag name. This is an attribute name. This is an attribute value. Remember OOP? Attribute means a value associated with an object. It's similar here. This is a tag. The tag name is input. The attribute name is type. The attribute value is button. The attribute name is value. The attribute value is minus. Let's add another attribute called ID, a unique identifier, and call it something like BTN plus. No, that doesn't make sense. Decrease BPM, a unique identifier. It's a text box for the BPM. Notice you cannot have spaces, or you shouldn't have spaces in your IDs in HTML tags. There's lots of naming conventions. Some people prefer like hyphenated text, depending on which set of technologies you're using or which company you work for. They'll all have their own style guide. As long as you're consistent, we're fine. I want to use the same button for both starting and stopping. So I'm going to call it BTN start stop. Looks exactly the same. Doesn't do anything yet, but I think I'm now at a point where we've passed our first test. So, our manager is happy. We can now report to our manager who says, right, we're doing waterfall. I know that you have 16 tests to do. I have no technical capacity, whatever, so I'm assuming they all take the same amount of time. If you've done test 1, that means you are 1/16 of the way through your project. So what happens in actual result? Well, we say pass or fail. This is a pass, I hope. And then we want to show a screenshot. We want to see the code. And there's not going to be space in your table for this. So how do we like separate this and move it onto a new section? I don't know, actually. Oh yeah, I'm going to delete all of this and just copy and paste them in again when I need them. There we go. So I've got my screenshot to show the code. I've got a screenshot to show how nasty the actual web page is. And we'd probably want some kind of documentation to go with it. Let's have a look and see. What are we expecting? Let's go full screen again. Back to development. Here we go. Provided evidence of each stage of the iterative development process. In your actual project, it will be iterative, which means you'll break it down into smaller chunks. And you'll say prototype 1 is going to look nasty. Prototype 2 might look pretty. Prototype 3 is going to work reliably. We're doing waterfall, so there are no prototypes. We just want the whole thing all in one go. We're not doing waterfall for your actual project. So you say which part you're working on from the analysis stage. That's kind of why I've said success criteria linked to this part. Why are we doing this bit right at the start? So we probably need a bit of commentary. To begin with, So that's what it means by explaining what you did and justified why. Provided evidence of the prototype versions. So this is my very first prototype. The solution will be structured, well-structured and modular in nature, so using procedures and functions. Well, I haven't got any code yet. Also worth noticing that HTML does not count as program code. HTML is structure, as in headings, titles, position, and content, as in text and images and videos, etc., but not code. All you submit is HTML. You get 0 marks for the implementation section. The only part we'll write code on will be JavaScript. So we'll ignore everything else for now. All right, let's make our code look pretty. So if this was an iterative model, then we might be on prototype 2. I would like a style sheet. So in our Solution Explorer, I've got one called styles.css. I'm going to delete it and add it in again. How do we do that? Right-click on your project, add a new file, call it styles.css. Doesn't matter about what it's actually called as long as it's .css. Oops, I cancelled it. Add a new file, styles.css. So if HTML is the structure and content, CSS is a brand new language and it's now the appearance. So we can put a rule for every tag. I've got a body tag here. We have a rule name and some brace brackets, scope brackets. And we're going to see what the background color could be. So the syntax here is the rule name, a colon, and the rule value. I'm going to make it look horrible with a red background. You won't be able to see that yet. It's still got a white background because the HTML page is not linked to the CSS page. So how do we link it? Well, in the head tag, we can put a link tag. We say the href is the link to the page. Now, if they're saved in the same folder, we can just do the file name. And we need to say that it is a style sheet. There we go. So now, that rule, look how horrible that is. The rule defined here, everything in the body tag's going to have a background color of red. Well, no, thank you. Let's have a look at your user interface planning. Mine's got a white background. Then we've got a blob here, which is black with a rounded background. I don't really want that blue line, but it'll have to do. So I don't want the background there to be white. What do I want? Well, I want this bit. I'm going to surround all of this in a div. And I'll give it a name of Metronome. There we go. You can put rules on for all of the user interface thingamabobs, but you can also give a rule to any particular ID. So this time, rather than the tag name, I'm going to say the metronome. The hash here means anything with an ID of this. So this is now going to be, is that black or just off black? I'm going to say it's black. 0 red, 0 green, 0 blue. You can specify it with 6 characters or 3 characters. Doesn't really matter. There we go. We've got a black background. I want a little bit of space on the inside. So if you are insane, you live in a padded room. So we'll put some padding in. Sorry, that's not very politically correct. Padding of... Now, we could specify this in pixels. But remember, we want it to be the same on any screen density. So instead of saying it in pixels, I'm going to specify it in characters. 1 EM is 1 letter character. I'd also like a bit of space around the edge. If people live on the margin of society, they are outside your social circles. Padding is inside the room. Margin is outside the room. Marginalized or on the outside. Padding keeps you safe on the inside. So, I don't know, let's have 2 characters worth of space around the outside. There we go. Border hyphen radius. Should we do this in EMs as well? Nice and rounded around the edge. Is that going to work? 2 meters? My goodness. No, thank you. Quite nice and rounded. Everything center aligned. Text aligned. You won't be expected to remember all of these for your exam. I'll show you probably next lesson the subset of CSS that you will be expected to recognize and understand. The syntax is important. What is your rule applying to? And then some scope with your scope bracket similar to C# or JavaScript or C or C++. Which rule are you changing? No spaces. A colon to say what's the rule value going to be. The rule value and then a semicolon. You don't need the semicolon if all you've got is just one rule. But if you don't have a semicolon and multiple rules, it's broken. So you must have the semicolon to separate multiple rules. Right, where did we get to? I wanted my buttons to be rounded. All of my buttons are inputs. So let's put a rule on for every input. There's not a hash in front because it's not an ID, it's just a tag name. Let's set a radius of 1 and some space of 1 character. There we go. Probably a bit more space around the edge. That's margin. Probably not a whole character. 0.2 EM, I don't know. Something like that. And then I want it to be center aligned as well. Can I do that here? Notice the spelling is always American, irritatingly. This, I want to be much bigger. How much bigger? I don't know. But quite big. So how can I change the text of just that? Well, it needs to have a rule just for this item. So it's got an ID of text BPM for me. Hash for ID. TXT BPM. It's case sensitive. Is it font size? Oh, yeah. You can specify it relatively, or I want it 10 times as big as it normally is. My goodness, no I don't. How about 5 times as big as it normally is? Nope, still too big. There we go, how about that? That's about as far as we'll get today. We'll go through a little bit more CSS next time, and then we can start working on the JavaScript. Please bear in mind, CSS and HTML does not count as program code. CSS describes the appearance. HTML describes the content and the structure. JavaScript describes the behavior. That's the bit we want to focus on for most of next lesson. Make sure that your files are saved. Make sure that you commit and push everything that you've done, including your documentation. So save and close. Notice here, I'm describing what I'm doing, but I also want to say which test we're working on. Test 1. Commit all and push. And that's as far as we're going to get today. Well done. We'll continue next lesson.